Hello, I'm Joshua Devora, and this is my video assignment for homework number 5 for class number 18. Today we are going to look at the concepts of speed, change in direction, agility, and quickness. After that, we will look into some sport-specific examples of those. And then finally, we'll wrap up with looking into the concept of rate of force development, and then how that impacts explosive athletic performance. So first, let's talk about speed. Our book defines speed as the skills and abilities to achieve high movement velocities. So when we think about speed, we think moving the body or a part of the body as fast as possible, typically in one direction. And when we look at this in sports, the most common example is sprinting. So this is where an athlete is looking to accelerate and reach the maximum velocity over a certain distance. So the speed can be heavily influenced by things like stride length, frequency, the technique, the muscle strength, the power, and the neuromuscular coordination. So I think two great sports-specific examples are the 100-meter dash and a wide receiver getting ready to run a deep route in football. So when we look at these two examples, we're seeing how fast the wide receiver can get past the corner and create separation, and the 100-meter dash, how fast that sprinter can get to the finish line compared to their opponents. When you look at both examples, they're both running linear. There's no change in direction. And both of their success depends on how quickly they can accelerate. And then once they reach their maximum velocity, how fast they can maintain that velocity. I think those are two great examples to look at because you can really see the differences in speed. If that wide receiver is fast and he has great speed, he'll create great separation from the corner. If that 100-meter dash sprinter has great speed, you'll be able to see him separate from his opponents and get to the finish line first. So with speed, you want to see how fast and how long they can maintain that maximum velocity. So next we are going to talk about change of direction. Our book defines this as the skills and abilities to explosively change directions, velocities, or modes. When you look at change of direction, it's oftentimes confused with agility. However, there is a key difference. When we look at change of direction, this is also the ability to decelerate, stop, and then rapidly re-accelerate in a different direction. Unlike agility, however, change of direction is planned. The athlete knows where they are going to go before the movement begins. So think about, I'm going to approach that cone to the left and then change direction and explode to the right. That's change of direction. As I approach the cone, I get ready to decelerate and then get ready to explosively reaccelerate again towards the opposite direction. So now let's look into a sports-specific example for change of direction. So we're going to look at a basketball player performing an agility test. We're going to look at the T-test. So that separates this again from agility is it's predetermined. Change of direction is predetermined. You know what you are going to do. So for a T-test, we have the cone set up in a T. We'll sprint to the cone, plant, decelerate when we approach that first cone, shuffle to the right, stop, decelerate, shuffle to the left, again, decelerate. And again, the important thing about change of direction is our ability to re-accelerate after we come to a stop, re-accelerate once we change direction. So I think this is a good example for it. Performing the T-test is because once we approach that first cone and we shuffle, we have to decelerate till we get to the cone on the right. And once we plant our foot, we have to re-accelerate and shuffle to the other direction. Next, we are going to talk about agility. Once again, agility is often confused with change of direction, but there are some key differences. So first of all, our book defines agility as the skills and abilities needed to change direction, velocities, or mode in response to a stimulus. So that stimulus is probably the key difference. So agility, once again, is our whole body movement involving the change of direction or velocity in response to that stimulus. The key component is that the athlete does this to something unexpected. That stimulus is often unexpected, whereas change of direction, it's predetermined, just like the T-test. Again, so agility requires the use of our perceptual cognitive ability in combination with our change of direction ability. So when we look into sports specific examples, let's look at a soccer defender. So say the striker is getting ready to attack and he's driving the ball, the soccer player has to observe try to observe the striker's movements, where he's going to go left or right, and then use that information to react. That agility uses it to react and try and make a stop, make a play on the ball. Another sports specific example would be a baseball shortstop, where I think the shortstop has to probably be the most agile person on the team, because think about it, the shortstop has a lot of ground to cover. So say the batter hits a really high velocity ground ball to that area, he has to be able to process that information, whether it's how the ball is spinning, where the ball has hit on the ground, if it's going to the left or right of him. And once he processes that information cognitively, he has to be able to react to it. And that's that agility part of it. He has to be able to recognize the right direction and move his body accordingly. And I think these are great examples of agility because the use of perception and decision making are required before the body movement occurs. So once again, agility combines the physical ability with the cognitive processing. So next we are going to talk about quickness. So quickness is the ability to react and initiate a movement rapidly, fast. So while there are some similarities to speed, quickness is different. It emphasizes the beginning of the movement, how fast that movement can start, rather than the overall time of the movement. So when we think about a sprinter, that beginning, that first initiation into the movement, rather than the overall sprint. The overall sprint would be more of speed. So when we think about that, an athlete can have a great top speed, but or a sprinter can have great top speed, but if they react quickly, they're already starting. If they react poorly, slowly, instead of quickly, they'll begin behind. So now let's look into some sport-specific examples of quickness. So the first one we are going to talk about is a baseball player getting ready to steal a base. So for those of you that don't know, in baseball, you can lead off the bag, and then when that pitcher begins the motion towards home, as soon as that motion begins for the pitcher to throw home, the runner can steal the base. So for quickness, we're looking at the runner watching the pitcher, and as soon as he begins that movement towards the plate, the runner reacts instantly, which is the quickness to begin to steal towards the next plate, towards the next base. Another example of quickness would be a tennis player reacting to an opponent's serve. So when the opposing player serves it, that tennis player usually only has fractions of a second to recognize the direction of the ball, the spin of the ball, and then react quickly, fast to that ball, to that serve. So now we are going to look at the rate of force development. Our book defines this as the development of maximal force in the minimal amount of time. So here we are looking at how quickly an athlete can develop force as soon as the muscles begin contracting. This, instead of focusing on the maximum amount of force someone can produce, the rate of force development actually focuses on how rapidly that force is generated. So rate of force development is an important concept to look at, because when you look at athletic movements, things like jumping, sprinting, cutting, throwing, these movements are quick. They often happen too quickly for athletes to use their maximum strength. So when you look at an athlete who can develop force more rapidly, and they can produce greater acceleration and explosive movements than another athlete with the same maximum strength, because they have a slower rate of force development. So to summarize it, an athlete with a greater rate of force development is able to have more explosive and accelerate quicker. So rate of force development is especially important in things like sprinting. So when you look at a sprinter, their feet really don't come in contact with the ground for high periods of time, often like milliseconds, right? So when you look at a sprinter running at high speeds, by the time their foot hits the floor, they don't have time to gradually build force. since their foot is only in contact with the ground for milliseconds, right? So they must apply a great amount of force almost immediately as that foot hits the ground. So the faster a sprinter can develop force during each foot strike, the greater the forward acceleration that sprinter has, which allows that sprinter to reach higher sprinting speeds more efficiently. So rate of force development is also important in things like change of direction. So when you think about it, athletes have to generate great amounts of force to decelerate, plant their foot, and then generate force again rapidly in order to change direction and reaccelerate. If an athlete has bad rate of force development, they'll lose valuable time when they're coming to the decelerate and then that stop, and then especially when they're going to reaccelerate, they have to rapidly produce force to get out quickly and reaccelerate. So now we are going to look at figure 19.1. This figure illustrates the concept of force development over time, and here we are going to evaluate three athletes: an untrained athlete, a heavy resistance trained athlete, and an explosive ballistic trained athlete. For this figure, we see that the force generated is on the vertical axis while the time is on the horizontal axis. So on this figure, we can clearly see that the explosively trained athlete has a much steeper curve. And what this means is he is able to reach higher levels of force much earlier. This represents a higher rate of force development. And the other athletes have flatter curves where they eventually reach the maximum force, but this takes much longer. So the key message of this figure is that athletic movements often happen too quickly for maximum strength to be developed. So success often depends on how quickly and rapidly these movements can be generated with greater force than how much strength these movements are performed. So this figure helps us understand why explosive movements and explosive training are so important for the success of athletes. While increasing maximum strength is important, improving how quickly an athlete can produce force is even more beneficial, in my opinion, especially for sports requiring sprinting, jumping, throwing, and other rapid changes of direction that require quick movements. So we have to train these athletes to help them quickly, rapidly increase their rate of force development.